Hi, my name is Gerhard Schwantner and welcome to Selling Power's Daily Report. Today we have the pleasure of continuing our conversation with Dr. Chris Croner. He's the author of a wonderful book called Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Gerhard.
So let's translate that theoretical framework into action skills. How do we as sales managers interview people to find out whether salespeople really have the drive they need in order to succeed in our business?
It's about asking the right types of questions for each of the three elements of drive. So for example, with need for achievement, we want to ask a person questions like, tell me about the kinds of sacrifices you've had to make to be successful. Tell me about the greatest goal you ever achieved professionally. Then pause, and after they tell you about that accomplishment, say, that's great. How do you plan to top it? You know, for things like competitiveness, you ask questions about, tell me about the last time you were competitive. And frequently you'll get an answer like, well, just the other day at the gym, I was on the treadmill, I'm looking at the person next to me and I'm noticing they're going a little bit faster than me, so I sped up. Then you always bring it back to the world of work. Now, how does that show up for you at work? What does it look like? Then for optimism, tell me about the last time you had to be persistent to make a sale. Find out what it really means for that person to be persistent, but always focus on what the person has done in the past rather than hypotheticals, because if we're dealing in hypotheticals, the person knows there's a right answer. And as a salesperson, they're usually clever enough to give you what they think you want to hear.
So what you're saying is that sales managers need to be very smart with asking questions, but also they need to be smarter with dealing with the information that comes out of a person.
Absolutely. It's important to probe into those answers very, very carefully. And that's what the book talks about, the things that I bring from the world of clinical psychology in terms of probing into a person's responses. For example, say you get someone who gives you a response that's kind of vague. Maybe you're talking about their previous job and they're saying, well, I had to leave that job because there were some misunderstandings with my supervisor. You can dig into that by asking a question like this. So Frank, if we had a magic wand, and we could change 3 things about that job so you would never want to leave, what would those 3 things be? And he may say something like, well, gee, I would have made more money, I wouldn't have had to fire my assistant, and I wouldn't have slugged the sales VP, or something like that. It won't be that extreme, but they'll give you something you can probe into because you're framing something that would be difficult for them in a positive way. If we had a magic wand, how could we make it perfect? So it's all about asking the right types of questions, digging in and probing carefully, asking for example after example. And eventually you will get misalock, you'll get absolute certainty on that particular set of skills.
So the personal interview is one part of the hiring process. Do you suggest that companies supplement that with psychological tests? Absolutely.
We find that testing is most effective at the beginning of the interview process. We encourage companies to plug in a test like the Drive test that we have way at the beginning of the process so that they can begin to make sure that the people they bring in for the interview are worth their time. Because as a manager, the most precious asset you have is your time. And you want to make sure that you spend that interview time with the people who are qualified to be there. So you give them a test that can ferret out Drive, that looks at need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism like the Drive test, so then you can decide, do I want to spend time with this person?
So can those salespeople take the test online, or is this a paper test?
It's actually a test online. They can take it at their convenience or in the sales manager's office. It's up to the company.
Takes how long?
40 minutes. So the person gets through a series of questions, and the questions are designed using a process called forced choice. So each question looks good to the person, where it'll say something like, tell me, which of these is most like you and which is least like you. And it'll say, I consider myself a leader, I'm highly motivated, I'm very confident, I'm a great relationship person. It's hard to decide what we're looking for, and they all sound good. So they have to make very difficult distinctions, which then allows the manager to understand where their priorities really sit.
And what is the printout you get after the test as a sales manager?
As a sales manager, you get the person's score on Drive, as well as the 3 elements of Drive that we talk about in the book: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, as well as the other core skills that we found to be important, things like persuasiveness, relationship skills, organization.
What I like most about your book is that it shows a lot of the questions that sales managers need to ask in a job interview. Have you tested all those questions?
Absolutely. I've been testing them nonstop for the last 6 years. When I see candidates, I ask those series of questions, and I encourage managers to use the same set of questions for every candidate to make sure that they're fair, create a Word document using the questions that we have in the book, and make sure that they probe those effectively.
Thank you, Chris. We're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Chris Croner tomorrow, and we'll talk about optimism and why it's important in recruiting and in selling.